A 17-year-old girl entered a virgin Amish man's cabin by mistake, in the dead of winter, with a blizzard howling through the Colorado mountains. She thought she was escaping danger, but she'd just stepped into a world ruled by silence, prayer, and rules no outsider could break. Inside that cabin, one man of faith fights his own storm, caught between his vows to God and the shivering stranger he never asked for. Outside, the sheriff's men ride through the snow, searching for a runaway girl they say must be returned, dead or alive. But mercy comes with a price. Whispers spread through the valley that the Amish man isn't as innocent as he seems, and the girl's secret could destroy them both. When the truth finally breaks through the snow and shame, will compassion save them or condemn them forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Through the howling December wind, Eden's fist struck the cabin door 3 times before her strength gave out. The sound barely carried over nature's fury, but it was enough. As consciousness slipped away, warm lamplight spilled across her face. Strong arms caught her before she hit the snow-covered porch. The world faded in and out. Eden felt herself being carried, heard the crack and pop of a fire, smelled wood smoke and something like fresh bread. A rough wool blanket scratched against her frozen cheeks as someone wrapped her tightly. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth, "don't send me back." "Be still," a quiet male voice answered. "You're safe here." The voice belonged to a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard. He wore simple dark clothes and suspenders, his manner calm but cautious as he stepped back from where he'd laid her near the hearth. The dancing flames cast his shadow long against the log walls. Eden tried to sit up, but her limbs felt leaden. The stage, it overturned. Others. There were others. "Rest now," the man said, moving to the iron stove where a kettle waited. "The storm rages too fierce to search. We must wait until morning." His words carried the lilt of an accent Eden couldn't place. German, maybe, or Dutch. She watched through half-closed eyes as he measured tea leaves into a ceramic pot, his movements precise and unhurried despite the emergency that had landed on his doorstep. The cabin was sparse but tidy. A narrow bed stood in one corner, its quilt perfectly straight. A wooden table held a lamp and an open Bible. No pictures adorned the walls, only a simple cross carved from pine. Everything spoke of order and simplicity. "I'm Eden," she managed between shivers. "Eden McKinney." The man poured steaming water over the tea leaves. "Jaden Brenner," he replied without turning. "This is my home." "I'm sorry to intrude, Mr. Brenner." "The Lord guides our paths." He brought her a cup of tea, helping her sit up enough to sip it. Warmth spread through her chest like a blessing. Even in the storm. Eden's hands shook as she held the cup. Memories of the accident flooded back. The driver's shout, the horrible lurch as the stage wheels slipped, the crack of splitting wood. She'd crawled from the wreck dazed but largely unhurt. The other passengers. "There was a mother and child," she said, "and an elderly man, the driver." "Peace," Jaden said softly. "Nothing can be done until dawn. Save your strength." Eden wanted to protest, but exhaustion dragged at her like weights. The tea's warmth and the fire's steady heat began to thaw her frozen limbs. Her wet clothes steamed slightly. "I should hang these to dry," she murmured, plucking at her sodden skirts. Jaden's cheeks colored slightly. He went to a trunk and removed a long nightshirt, laying it beside her. "I will step outside while you change. Call when you are decent." Despite her weakness, Eden managed a wan smile at his formality. You needn't go out in that storm, Mr. Brenner. Just turn your back. He did so without comment, facing the wall as she struggled out of her wet things and into the nightshirt. It smelled of soap and cedar, falling past her knees in clean white folds. I'm finished, she said, wrapping the blanket around herself again. Jaden gathered her wet clothes and hung them on a line near the stove. Then he knelt beside his bed and began to pray in a low voice, mixing English and German words. Eden caught phrases asking for guidance and wisdom. The wind howled louder, rattling the shutters. Eden pulled the blanket tighter, fighting rising panic as she thought of the others from the stage, lost in this killing weather. What right had she to be safe and warm while they might be freezing to death? Yet she could barely move, let alone go searching in a blizzard. Jaden rose from his prayers and added wood to the fire. The flames threw his face into sharp relief. Young, she realized, perhaps only a few years older than her own 17 years. His expression was troubled as he gazed out the window at the swirling snow. Try to sleep, he said. I will watch and pray. Eden wanted to thank him properly, to explain why she'd been on that stage, to apologize for disrupting his solitary life. But her body's demands could not be denied. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Jaden Brenner kneeling again in prayer, his lips moving silently as the storm raged outside and the fire cast his shadow on the wall like the wings of an angel. Dawn crept over the snowbound landscape, painting the drifts in shades of rose and gold. Eden stirred beneath a thick, quilted coverlet, her eyes fluttering open to find herself in an unfamiliar cabin. The events of the previous night rushed back. The stage accident, the blinding snow, the stranger's door. Jaden Brenner stood at his iron stove, stirring something in a pot that filled the cabin with the rich aroma of beef broth. He wore the same simple dark clothes as the night before, his movements measured and deliberate. When he noticed she was awake, he gave a slight nod. Good morning, he said softly. I trust you slept well? Eden sat up slowly, her muscles protesting. Yes, thank you. I don't know how to repay your kindness. No payment is needed. He ladled steaming broth into a wooden bowl. Here, you must rebuild your strength. As Eden sipped the warming liquid, Jaden settled onto a straight-backed chair, his hands folded in his lap. I should explain some things, he said. I am Amish. Plain folk, some call us. We live simply, following God's ways. No firearms, no worldly vanities. His eyes met hers directly. And no lies. The nearest neighbor is 6 miles south, through Miller's Valley. Eden's hands trembled around the bowl. I'll leave as soon as the storm clears. I don't mean to be a burden. Jaden glanced towards the window, where fresh snow was already beginning to fall. The trail will be impassable for days, he said quietly. You are welcome to stay until it's safe to travel. But surely people will talk. Let them talk. I cannot turn away someone in need. He rose from his chair. I must tend to the livestock. Rest. Regain your strength. Eden watched through the window as Jaden made his way to the small barn, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. He moved with purpose, carrying water and hay to his animals, a few sheep, a milk cow, some chickens scratching in the shelter of the barn. When he returned, his arms were full of split kindling for the fire. The day passed slowly. Eden dozed, still weak from her ordeal, while Jaden went about his tasks. He seemed to have an endless store of quiet industry, mending harness leather, whittling new pegs for his tools, sweeping the plank floor until it shone. As evening approached, the snow began falling more heavily. Jaden lit his lamp and placed a wooden chair carefully between where Eden rested and his own seat. From a shelf, he took down a well-worn Bible bound in black leather. "Would you mind," he asked, "if I read from the Psalms?" Eden shook her head, and Jaden's voice filled the cabin, soft and steady. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." The familiar words washed over Eden like a balm. In her father's house, religion had been a harsh thing of rules and judgment. But here, in this simple cabin with this quiet man, she heard only peace in the ancient verses. Her heart ached at the difference. When the chapter was finished, Jaden closed the Bible carefully. "Time for rest," he said, rising to check the fire one last time. Eden watched as he moved to the door, sliding the heavy wooden latch into place with a solid thunk. In the lamplight, she saw him bow his head slightly, his lips moving in silent prayer. She knew he was asking for strength to resist temptation, strength to weather the scandal that would surely come from sheltering a young woman alone. Yet he had chosen to help her anyway, this stranger who had literally fallen at his door. The lamp dimmed low, and Eden pulled the quilted coverlet up to her chin. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs heavy with snow. Inside, there was only the crack of the fire, the soft sound of breathing, and the presence of a kindness she had never known before. Jaden settled onto his pallet near the hearth, keeping the chair between them like a sentinel. His final words before sleep were simple. "Good night, Miss McKinney. God keep you safe." "Good night, Mr. Brenner," Eden whispered back. "And thank you." The snow continued to fall outside, building drifts that would indeed make travel impossible for days to come. But for now, in this moment, there was shelter from the storm. Both the one that raged outside and the one that had driven Eden to flee into the night. The morning light filtered through the cabin's windows, casting pale squares on the plank floor. Eden stood beside Jaden at his worn wooden table, her sleeves rolled up as she worked the bread dough with uncertain hands. Though they hadn't exchanged more than a dozen words since sunrise, the silence felt comfortable, broken only by the whisper of flour against wood and the constant moan of wind outside. "Like this?" Eden asked, pressing her palms into the sticky mass. Jaden nodded, demonstrating the rhythm of fold and turn, fold and turn. His large hands moved with practiced ease, and Eden found herself matching his motions. The dough gradually became smooth under their combined efforts. As the morning wore on, Jaden showed her other essential tasks. He demonstrated how to bank the cooking fire, carefully arranging the coals and ash to keep embers alive through the night. Eden watched intently, determined to be useful rather than a burden. While they worked, she began humming softly, an old hymn her mother had loved, "Come thou fount of every blessing." The familiar melody filled the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Jaden's movements slowed as he listened, his face softening at the gentle tune. Through the window, they could see the snow continuing to fall. The drifts had grown past the window's lower edge, and still the white flakes swirled down relentlessly. Jaden's brow furrowed as he considered the implications. At this rate, the trail would remain impassable not just for days, but possibly weeks. A movement in the distance caught his eye, a dark shape moving through the white haze. As it drew nearer, the figure resolved into a lone rider, methodically checking the scattered homesteads. Jaden's heart quickened. The rider's bearing and steady pace suggested a lawman, probably a sheriff's scout searching for someone. Without a word, he crossed to the windows and pulled the wooden shutters closed, plunging the cabin into sudden dimness. When he turned, Eden stood frozen by the table, her face drained of color. The fear in her eyes confirmed what he'd suspected. She wasn't just a stranded traveler. She was running from someone. They finished their tasks in tenser silence, lighting the lamps early against the growing dark. Over the simple supper of bread and stew, Eden stared into her bowl, pushing the food around with her spoon. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "My father," she began, then swallowed hard. "He lost everything at cards, the ranch, the cattle, even our furniture. Then he sold my hand in marriage to settle the last of his debts." Her fingers twisted in her skirt. "The man is 50 years old, Mr. Brenner. He already buried 2 wives. Jaden's jaw tightened, his usual gentle expression hardening into something fierce. "No father has the right to barter his child like cattle," he said, the words coming out rough with emotion. "Marriage should be a sacred bond, freely chosen before God." Eden's shoulders shook as she suppressed a sob. "I had nowhere else to go." Jaden rose from the table, his movement deliberate and calm, despite the anger she could see in his eyes. "You need rest," he said softly. "The cabin is yours tonight. I will sleep in the barn loft." "But the cold. I have plenty of blankets and the animals keep the barn warm enough." He gathered some bedding and his Bible. "Bar the door behind me. You'll be safe here." Eden followed him to the door, watching as he made his way through the deepening snow to the barn. Through the frost-rimed window, she could see the golden glow of his lantern as he climbed to the loft. The light remained steady, a beacon in the gathering night. Her heart felt full to bursting with gratitude, yet heavy with guilt. This good man had opened his home to her without question, showing more kindness than she'd known in years. Now he gave up his own comfort to protect her reputation. But she knew that sheltering her could bring him trouble, if the sheriff found her here, or if rumors spread among his Amish community. Eden pressed her hand against the cold window pane, watching Jaden's lantern glow through the falling snow. The soft light seemed to embody everything about him, steady, warm, unwavering in darkness. She sent up a silent prayer, asking God to protect this gentle soul who had chosen to protect her, whatever the cost might be to himself. The days melted together like snowflakes on warm glass. Each morning, Eden woke to find fresh drifts had transformed the world outside into something both beautiful and forbidding. The snow now rose higher than the split-rail fence, turning Jaden's homestead into an island of warmth in a vast white sea. Inside the cabin, they fell into a gentle rhythm. Jaden proved to be a patient teacher, showing Eden how to tend to the daily needs that kept them alive. One crisp morning, he led her to the woodpile, demonstrating how to position the logs and swing the axe. "Let the weight of the blade do the work," he explained, his breath visible in the cold air. Eden's first attempts sent chips flying wildly, but gradually she found the right motion. The satisfying crack of splitting wood became a familiar sound, and her arms grew stronger with each passing day. In the barn, Jaden's lone cow needed constant attention. He showed Eden how to approach from the left side, speaking soft words to keep the animal calm. His careful hands guided hers as she learned to milk, teaching her the steady rhythm that would coax forth the precious liquid they needed for butter and cheese. "You have gentle hands," he observed quietly one morning, watching her work. Eden felt her cheeks warm at the rare praise. During the long afternoons, Eden occupied herself with mending. She'd discovered a basket of Jaden's shirts, worn at the elbows and fraying at the cuffs. Her needle moved in and out with practiced precision, each stitch a small act of gratitude for his protection. Sometimes she caught him watching her work, his expression thoughtful. One morning, they woke to find the howling wind had finally stilled. The silence felt almost holy, broken only by the crunch of their boots as they ventured outside. Armed with wooden shovels, they began clearing paths between the cabin, barn, and well. The work was hard, but Eden found herself smiling at the simple satisfaction of it. As they paused to catch their breath, Eden gazed out at the glittering expanse stretching to the horizon. The sun had transformed the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, awe in her voice. "God must live in places like this, don't you think? Where everything is pure and clean and new." Jaden turned to look at her, struck by the wonder in her expression. A smile tugged at his lips before he caught himself, troubled by the warmth that bloomed in his chest at her words. He quickly bent back to his shovel, but Eden had seen the flash of joy cross his face. The peace of the morning shattered that afternoon. Eden was hanging freshly washed clothes inside to dry when she heard Jaden's sharp intake of breath by the window. Following his gaze, she saw two gray shapes moving through the trees, wolves drawn by the scent of livestock. Jaden grabbed his lantern and pitchfork, moving swiftly towards the door. Eden's heart leapt into her throat as she watched him stride toward the pen where his animals were housed. The wolves circled warily, their yellow eyes fixed on the sheep huddled within. Jaden advanced steadily, swinging the lantern in a wide arc while jabbing the pitchfork forward. His voice rose in a commanding shout that echoed across the snow. The wolves hesitated, then slunk backward, retreating into the trees. Eden ran to him without thinking, her fingers clutching his sleeve. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice shaking. She could feel his heart racing beneath the rough fabric of his shirt. "Yeah," he answered softly. "They will not return. Tonight." The light and noise frightened them. Back inside the cabin, Eden's hands trembled as she prepared tea. The afternoon's excitement had left them both shaken, and the hot drink was comforting. As they sat before the fire, Eden recalled Jaden's fierce determination facing down the wolves. "You were so brave," she said, smiling over her cup. "Like David protecting his flock." A surprised chuckle escaped him, the first time she'd heard him laugh. The sound transformed his entire face, softening the careful lines around his eyes. Eden found herself laughing too, the tension of the afternoon dissolving into unexpected joy. As evening settled around them, the cabin felt different somehow. The silence between them had grown comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. Outside, the temperature rose slightly, bringing with it the first hint of approaching thaw. But Eden knew that warmer weather would bring its own dangers. Searchers, questions, and decisions that could not be delayed forever. For now, though, they sat in the gentle lamplight, sharing the peace they'd found in this snowbound sanctuary. The tea grew cold in their cups as they talked softly of simple things, the day's work, memories of childhood winters, favorite passages from Scripture. Each word seemed to weave another thread in the delicate bond growing between them. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a well-worn Bible. The endless snowfall finally ceased, leaving behind a world encased in crystal. The drifts had hardened into crusty waves that could almost bear a person's weight. Each footstep now broke through with a sharp crack that echoed across the frozen landscape. Eden stood at the window one afternoon, watching the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow. The peaceful scene shattered as the distinctive sound of approaching hoofbeats crunched through the frozen terrain. Her heart stumbled in her chest. Jaden rose from where he'd been mending a harness, his movements deliberate and calm. Through the frosted glass, they could make out 3 riders approaching, their dark shapes stark against the white expanse. The men's heavy coats were dusted with snow, and their horses' breaths came out in great clouding puffs. "Hide," Jaden whispered, his voice barely audible. Behind the pantry curtain? Eden slipped behind the heavy cloth, just as boots thumped on the porch. A sharp knock rattled the door. She pressed herself against the rough cabin wall, trying to still her trembling hands. Jaden opened the door with measured care. Sheriff Thomas Lane stood in the entrance, his badge catching the winter light. Two deputy-looking men flanked him, their eyes sharp as they peered past Jaden into the cabin's interior. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Hope we're not disturbing your peace, Mr. Brenner." "9? No," Jaden replied softly. "What brings you so far from town?" Sheriff Lane removed his hat, revealing gray-streaked hair. "We're searching for a runaway girl, 17 years old, dark hair, green eyes, disappeared from a stagecoach about 3 weeks back." He paused, studying Jaden's face. "You seen anyone pass through these parts?" Eden held her breath, her heart thundering so loud she feared they would hear it. Through a tiny gap in the curtain, she could see Jaden's profile as he met the sheriff's questioning gaze with steady blue eyes. "Only snow and silence here," Jaden answered, his voice carrying the simple clarity of truth, even in deception. "The trail has been impassable since the big storm." The sheriff's eyes drifted across the cabin's interior, past the neat bed with its quilted coverlet over the swept hearth, toward the curtained pantry. Eden pressed deeper into the shadows, praying the thick fabric would hide any betraying movement. One of the deputies shifted his weight, causing the porch boards to creak. "Mighty clean cabin for a man living alone," he muttered, just loud enough to hear. Sheriff Lane's gaze snapped back to Jaden's face, searching for any flicker of guilt. But the Amish man's expression remained as serene as a frozen lake. "Well," the sheriff said finally, replacing his hat, "if you do see anything suspicious, you'll let us know." It wasn't quite a question. "I live by truth," Jaden replied quietly. The words seemed to hang in the cold air between them. The men turned away, their boots crunching back toward their horses. Eden could hear them muttering to each other as they mounted up, their words carried away by the winter wind. She remained frozen behind the curtain until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely down the ridge. Only then did she stumble out, her legs weak with relief. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the full weight of what had just happened crashed over her. Jaden had lied, had broken one of his most sacred principles, to protect her. The magnitude of his sacrifice overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Jaden stood by the window, watching until the riders disappeared completely. His shoulders were tense, and when he finally turned to face her, she could see the conflict etched in his features. "The Lord knows when to close a door," he said softly, though his usual certainty seemed shaken. As evening approached, they sat in troubled silence by the fire. Finally, Jaden spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Lies breed consequences, Eden." He paused, and when he continued, his voice broke slightly. "Every untruth plants seeds that grow into thorns." Eden wrapped her arms around herself, understanding the weight of what he'd done for her. Not just the risk of legal trouble, but the deeper cost to his conscience. The firelight caught the moisture in his eyes as he struggled with this compromise of his principles. When dawn arrived the next morning, Eden found Jaden already awake, staring out at the snow. The sheriff's tracks were half buried, under a light dusting of fresh powder, but their presence lingered like a shadow over the homestead. The threat remained as real as the frozen ground beneath their feet, and they both knew it. February arrived with gentler skies and longer days. Sunlight caught the icicles hanging from the cabin's eaves, turning them into crystal chimes that dripped steadily onto the packed snow below. Inside, Warmth from the wood stove wrapped around Eden and Jaden as they sat at the rough-hewn table, heads bent over his cherished Bible. "Try this verse again," Jaden encouraged, his finger tracing beneath the words. The book lay open between them, its pages soft and well-worn from years of daily reading. Eden leaned closer, squinting at the mix of German and English text. "The Lord is my shepherd," she began carefully. "I shall not—" She paused, struggling with the next word. "Want," Jaden supplied softly. His breath stirred a loose strand of her hair, and she felt warmth rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. "I shall not want," she repeated, the ancient words falling like music from her lips. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Jaden nodded approvingly. "Your pronunciation improves each day." Later that afternoon, Eden stirred a pot of stew bubbling on the stove. She reached for the small cloth pouch of dried herbs she'd found in the pantry. "Watch carefully," she instructed, sprinkling pinches of thyme and sage into the pot. "These make all the difference." Jaden observed with quiet interest as she explained each seasoning. The cabin filled with rich aromas that reminded Eden of her mother's kitchen before everything had gone wrong. Without thinking, she began to hum. "Shall we gather at the river?" her mother's favorite hymn. The familiar melody wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Jaden's eyes softened as he listened, his hands still on the table where he'd been mending a shirt button. Eden reached for the heavy iron kettle without thinking. Pain flared instant and sharp as her palm met the scorching metal. She jerked back with a cry, cradling her burned hand against her chest. "Let me see," Jaden said suddenly beside her. His own hands were calloused but gentle as he examined her reddened palm. Without a word, he led her to the water bucket, submerging her hand in its cool depths. Time seemed to stop as they stood there, his larger frame sheltering her smaller one, their breaths mingling in the quiet air. Eden could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back, the careful way he supported her wrist beneath the water. Neither spoke, but the air between them crackled with unspoken awareness. After treating her burn with cool cloths and soothing salve, they settled by the fire. The flames painted dancing shadows on the walls as darkness gathered outside. "Tell me about your home," Eden said softly, flexing her bandaged hand. "Your family in Pennsylvania." Jaden's eyes grew distant, with memory. "Lancaster County," he began, his voice warm with affection. "Rolling hills greener than you can imagine, farmland stretching far as the eye can see." He described his childhood on their family farm, the rhythm of seasons, the comfort of tradition, the strength of community. "Why did you leave?" Eden asked. A shadow crossed his face. "My brother joined the army, against our ways. The elders—" He paused, pain flickering in his eyes. "Sometimes following one's conscience means walking a lonely path." Eden understood too well. She told him about her mother then, her gentle spirit, her love of hymns, how she'd withered away like a flower denied sunlight. About her father's spiral into drinking and gambling after her mother's death, until debt consumed what little honor he had left. Twilight deepened outside the cabin windows. Jaden lit the lamp and bowed his head. "Shall we pray?" Eden nodded, bowing her own head as his quiet voice filled the room. "Lord, we thank thee for thy mercies, for shelter from storm, for sustenance that nourishes body and soul, for peace in this sanctuary you have provided." "For shelter, sustenance, and peace," Eden repeated softly, the words rising from her heart with genuine gratitude. She felt Jaden's approving glance, warm as sunshine. Morning arrived clear and bright, the February sun glinting off snow-laden branches. Eden was adding wood to the stove when a distant call echoed through the valley. A rider's voice, carried on the crystal air. She froze, wood clutched against her chest as the sound floated closer. Jaden appeared in the doorway, his face grave. They both knew what it meant. Word of her presence had begun to spread, traveling faster than the melting snow. The peaceful sanctuary they'd built seemed suddenly fragile as the icicles dripping outside. March brought warmer winds that nibbled at the snowdrifts. Creeks awakened beneath their ice, their melting music echoing through the valley. Mud season had arrived, turning the packed snow into treacherous brown slush that sucked at boots and wagon wheels. Jaden stood at the cabin door, adjusting the harness on his dappled mare. The milk cans clinked in the wagon bed behind him, full from the morning's milking. He glanced back at Eden, who hovered in the doorway with worry creasing her brow. "I'll return before sundown," he assured her, his voice steady despite his own unease. It would be his first trip to the settlement since the sheriff's visit. Eden's fingers worked nervously at the edge of her apron. "Be careful," she whispered, then ducked back inside before he could see the fear in her eyes. The wagon wheels cut deep ruts in the thawing earth as Jaden made his way down the winding trail. His mare's hooves made wet, sucking sounds in the mud, and patches of dirty snow still clung to the shadowed hollows. The morning sun felt warm on his face, but it couldn't ease the knot of tension in his chest. Inside the cabin, Eden tried to keep her hands busy. She settled by the window with her mending, letting sunshine fall across the worn shirts she was patching. The steady rhythm of needle and thread usually calmed her, but today her stitches wandered as her thoughts raced ahead to the settlement. In town, Jaden tied his mare outside the feed store. The wooden sidewalks were crowded with townspeople eager to be out after the long winter. He kept his head down, focusing on his errand list: flour, salt, lamp oil, but voices carried clearly through the open door of the feed store as he approached. "That Amish feller up on the ridge," a man's voice drawled, thick with contempt. "Hear tell he's hiding some girl up there. Ain't natural, living alone like that." Another voice joined in. "Ought to be a law against it. Man can't trust them quiet ones." Jaden's hands trembled as he gathered his supplies, the familiar items suddenly heavy as stones. He could feel eyes on his back, measuring, judging. The urge to defend himself, to proclaim his innocence, burned in his throat. But he remembered his father's teachings. Pride leads to anger, anger to sin. He paid for his goods in silence and left, the bell above the door chiming mockingly behind him. The return journey seemed endless. Shadows lengthened across the muddy track as his mare plodded homeward. When the cabin finally came into view, Eden was waiting anxiously by the door. One look at his face told her everything. Inside, as he unloaded supplies, his voice was heavy. "The gossip spreads like wildfire," he admitted. "They speak unkindly of my reputation." Eden sank into a chair, her face pale. "Because of me." "Because they fear what they don't understand," Jaden corrected gently. "We must trust in God's plan even when the path seems dark." Evening settled around them, bringing new sounds of spring. Frogs had awakened in the creek bottom, their chorus rising through the damp air. The familiar winter silence was breaking, just as their peaceful isolation was ending. Eden stood at the open door, listening to the frogs' song. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "Do you regret it, helping me that night?" Jaden looked up from banking the fire. Lamplight caught the strong lines of his face, the quiet certainty in his eyes. "No act of mercy is sin," he said softly. "Whatever comes, I stand by that truth." Later, after Eden had retired to her bed behind the curtain, Jaden lay on his cot near the dying fire. Sleep came fitfully, filled with troubled dreams. In his vision, he saw flames racing across his wheat fields, consuming everything he'd built. The fire took the shape of pointing fingers, of wagging tongues, of judgment bearing down like a prairie storm. He woke with a start, his heart pounding. Through the window, the moon sailed high and cold above the muddy yard. The frogs still sang their spring song, heedless of human troubles. Jaden lay awake for a long time, praying for strength to weather whatever storm was gathering on their horizon. In her own bed, Eden listened to his restless movements, adding her own silent prayers to his. The world beyond their cabin walls was stirring to life again, but with that awakening came dangers they had been sheltered from during the long winter months. She pulled her quilt tighter, remembering his words. No act of mercy is sin. She prayed they would both have the courage to stand by that truth in the days ahead. The crunch of wagon wheels on half-frozen ground drew Jaden's attention from his morning chores. Through the pale morning light, he saw a black buggy approaching, its shape unmistakable. His heart sank as he recognized Elder Stoltzfus's team of matched grays, with Elder Yoder beside him on the seat. "Quick," he whispered to Eden, who stood frozen by the water pump. "The loft." She gathered her skirts and climbed swiftly up the barn ladder, disappearing into the shadowy hay just as the wagon reached the yard. Jaden straightened his collar and walked out to meet them, fighting to keep his expression neutral. The elders descended slowly from their seats, their black coats stark against the muddy yard. Elder Stoltzfus' white beard caught the morning light as he nodded gravely. "Brother Brenner." "Welcome," Jaden said, bowing slightly. "Will you come inside?" The cabin seemed to shrink as the two older men entered, their presence filling the small space with unspoken judgment. Elder Yoder's eyes swept the room, noting the two cups by the wash basin, the woman's shawl hastily tucked behind a chair. "We have heard troubling reports, Brother Brenner." Elder Stoltzfus settled onto a chair, his weathered hands folded over his walking stick. "The English in town speak of a girl living here." In the loft above their heads, Eden pressed herself against the rough floorboards, barely daring to breathe. Dust motes danced in the thin shaft of light near her face as she strained to hear. "I have given shelter to one in need," Jaden answered carefully, "as our faith teaches us to aid the stranger." Elder Yoder's voice cut sharp as a blade. "A young, unmarried woman, living under your roof. This is not our way, Brother Brenner." "I have kept my vows," Jaden said firmly, meeting their stern gazes. "Before God, I swear no impropriety has occurred. She needed refuge from the winter storms, nothing more." "Your virtue is not the only concern," Elder Stoltzfus said. "Appearance matters. Scandal threatens the whole community, already the English whisper and point fingers." Above them, Eden's heart pounded so hard she feared they would hear it. She pressed her hands against her mouth, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "The girl must leave," Elder Yoder declared, "or face the consequences of your choice." The word hung unspoken between them. Shunning. Exclusion from the only community Jaden had ever known. No place at worship, no share in commerce, no fellowship in times of need. "Spring comes," Elder Stoltzfus added, his tone softening slightly. "The roads will soon be passable. Send her away before Easter, or we must act according to our laws." Jaden stood motionless by the hearth, his face a mask of careful control. "I understand." The elders rose, their verdict delivered. At the door, Elder Stoltzfus paused. "We pray you choose wisdom, Brother Brenner." The wagon's departure left a heavy silence. Jaden sank into his chair by the fire, staring into the glowing coals as if seeking answers in their depths. The minutes stretched long as he sat, unmoving. Eden finally descended the ladder, her steps hesitant. Her face was streaked with tears as she approached him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to bring such trouble to your door, such disgrace to your name." Jaden didn't look up from the fire, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. "You are safe here until the thaw. Then God will show your road. But your people, God's mercy comes before men's rules," he said quietly. "Even good rules made with good intent." Outside, the steady drip of melting snow from the eaves marked time's passage. Each drop was a reminder that winter's grip was loosening, that change was coming whether they wished it or not. The sound seemed to echo Eden's tears as she stood in the middle of the cabin, lost between gratitude and shame. The rest of the day passed in uncertain silence. Eden moved through her usual tasks, feeding chickens, kneading bread, carrying water, but each action felt weighted with new meaning. Every domestic gesture seemed to mock the elder's accusations, yet she couldn't bear to sit idle. Jaden worked outdoors until dusk, his axe ringing against wood as he split logs with mechanical precision. The physical labor helped quiet his troubled thoughts, though he couldn't completely silence the echo of the elder's warnings. When darkness finally drew them both inside, the cabin felt different. The walls that had sheltered them through winter now seemed to press close with questions neither could answer. Their usual evening routine, sharing soup and bread, reading scripture by lamplight, carried a new poignancy. The steady drip of snowmelt continued through the night, nature's timepiece counting down the days until winter's protection would fade completely, forcing them to face the consequences of their choices. April sunshine warmed the muddy yard as winter's last patches of snow retreated into shadowed hollows. The mountain air carried hints of pine and fresh grass, so different from the stark, frozen months that had bound Eden and Jaden together in their isolated sanctuary. Through the open cabin door, Eden watched a wagon approach, her heart drumming against her ribs. The trader's cart creaked to a stop, its driver, a broad-shouldered man in a plain gray coat, climbing down with practiced ease. His weathered face crinkled kindly beneath his wide-brimmed hat as he greeted Jaden. "Brother Samuel Whitaker," the Masham trader introduced himself, extending a work-roughened hand. "The friends in Denver will welcome thee gladly, young sister." Eden nodded, unable to find her voice. Jaden had spent weeks arranging this escort through careful letters, ensuring her safe passage to the Quaker settlement where she could build a respectable new life. The thought of leaving twisted in her chest like a physical ache. "They need teachers," Brother Samuel continued, his gentle tone somehow making it harder to bear. "Children deserve good instruction, and the meeting house always welcomes those led to serve." Inside the cabin, Eden's few possessions waited by the door, a bundle no bigger than a loaf of bread, her mother's shawl, now darned and cleaned, the sewing kit Jaden had given her for Christmas, filled with careful stitches of gratitude, and most precious, the Bible he'd pressed into her hands that morning, its leather cover smooth with age. Eden opened it once more, reading the words he'd inscribed inside the cover in his careful hand. "Love casteth out fear." The ink was still fresh, slightly smudged where his fingers had trembled. She traced the letters, remembering how he'd stood by the window afterward, staring out at the distant mountains as if they held answers to unspoken questions. "We should sup before the journey," Jaden said now, his voice steady despite the shadows under his eyes. "The road to Denver is long." They gathered around the rough-hewn table one last time, the familiar scents of cornbread and bean soup filling the cabin. Brother Samuel bowed his head as Jaden offered grace, but Eden could barely focus on the words. Every detail seemed to burn itself into her memory. The way lamplight caught the grain of the wooden walls, the quiet click of spoons against bowls, the crackle of the hearth that had warmed her through so many cold nights. The meal passed in near silence. When the bowls were cleared, Jaden excused himself to the barn for evening prayers, leaving Eden alone with her thoughts and the soft glow of the oil lamp. Her fingers found her needle and thread almost without conscious thought. She had saved a piece of soft leather, working it carefully in spare moments over the past weeks. Now, as night settled over the mountain, she began to stitch with deliberate care. Hours slipped by as she crafted a protective cover for Jaden's own Bible, the one that had taught her to read during those long winter evenings. The lamp burned low as she embroidered his name with tiny, even stitches. Each letter was a prayer, each knot a memory, his patience as she stumbled over verses, his quiet strength when the sheriff came asking questions, his unwavering faith when the elders threatened him with shunning. The golden thread caught the lamplight like tears as she worked, her own dropping occasionally onto the leather. Dawn's first gray light was seeping through the windows when Eden finally tied off the last stitch. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, and the needle had left tiny marks in her fingers, but satisfaction warmed her chest as she looked at her work. The cover was simple but beautiful, a testament to all she had learned under his roof. She had just set down her needle when it slipped from her grasp, rolling across the table. Fatigue crashed over her like a wave, and she found herself drifting, head pillowed on her arms beside her final gift. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the neat row of stitches spelling out Jaden Brenner, a name that had come to mean safety, kindness, and a love pure enough to risk everything for another's well-being. The rising sun found her still there, the completed Bible cover beneath her cheek, and the needle resting in her loosened grip. Through the window, morning light painted the mountain peaks gold, promising fair weather for the journey ahead. But for these last precious moments, Eden slept peacefully in the place that had become, however briefly, her sanctuary. Morning painted the mountains gold as Eden stood in the yard, her small bundle clutched to her chest. The trader's wagon creaked as Brother Samuel made his final preparations, checking harnesses and securing supplies for the journey ahead. Jaden emerged from the cabin carrying a cloth-wrapped package of provisions, bread, dried apples, and cheese for their travel. His face remained composed, though something flickered behind his eyes as he approached the wagon. "The weather looks fair," he said softly, helping Eden onto the wooden seat. His strong hands lifted her as if she weighed nothing, yet lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. A tear slipped down Eden's cheek as she settled beside Brother Samuel. "May God keep you safe," Jaden murmured, stepping back from the wagon. Sunlight caught the moisture in his eyes, though his expression stayed steady. He pressed one hand to his heart, a gesture of farewell that spoke louder than words. The wagon lurched forward as Brother Samuel clicked to his team. Eden turned to watch Jaden's figure grow smaller, his tall form straight and still in the morning light. He stood there until the wagon disappeared around the bend, then turned slowly toward his daily tasks. In the barn, Jaden buried himself in work, his hands moving automatically through familiar motions, feeding livestock, mucking stalls, mending tackle. His lips moved in constant prayer, asking protection for the girl who had changed his quiet world. "Lord, guard her path," he whispered, forcing himself to focus on each chore rather than the aching silence of his cabin. The sun had barely passed its peak when thundering hoofbeats shattered his peace. 5 riders pounded into his yard, dust rising beneath their horses' hooves. Jaden's heart sank as he recognized Sheriff Lane's stern face among them. "Jaden Brenner," the sheriff called out, swinging down from his saddle. "We got some questions about that girl you've been keeping here." Jaden set down his pitchfork carefully. "What about Eden? She says you held her against her will all winter." The sheriff's voice was hard as iron. "Says you threatened her if she tried to leave." The words struck Jaden like physical blows. He staggered slightly, catching himself against the barn door. "There must be some mistake," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "No mistake." Sheriff Lane pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Got her signed statement right here. You're under arrest, Brenner." Jaden made no move to resist as the deputies approached with manacles. His mind spun, trying to understand how the girl who had shared his prayers and bread could speak such untruths. Yet even now, his heart refused to judge her. "I will come peacefully," he said quietly, holding out his wrists. Miles away, in the back of the trader's wagon that had been stopped by the sheriff's men, Eden huddled miserably, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Through the canvas cover, she could hear the deputies repeating her false statement, words she had spoken only when they threatened to charge Jaden with worse crimes if she told the truth about her running away. "Better he face a few months for unlawful detention than years for other things," one deputy had sneered, making her sign the paper. Now those lies echoed in her ears like accusations. The wagon rolled into Silver Vale as afternoon shadows lengthened across the dusty street. Eden caught a glimpse of Jaden being led into the jailhouse, his head bowed but his steps steady. The sight of iron bars closing behind him nearly broke her heart. Inside his cell, Jaden sat on the narrow bunk, his prayer book clasped in work-roughened hands. The setting sun threw orange light through the small window, catching the golden threads of the new Bible cover he had found on his table that morning. Eden's final gift. His fingers traced the carefully stitched letters of his name as he began to pray, not for freedom, but for understanding. "Your will be done," he whispered, even as his heart ached with questions he dared not voice. The familiar words of Psalms brought some comfort as darkness settled over the town, though sleep remained far away. Through the iron bars, he could see stars beginning to appear in the purple evening sky. The same stars would be shining over his empty cabin, over the trading wagon carrying Eden toward Denver, over all the tangled paths that had led them to this moment. Despite everything, he could not bring himself to regret opening his door that snowy night so long ago. The sheriff's keys rattled as he made his evening rounds. "Comfortable, Brenner?" he asked gruffly. Jaden looked up from his prayer book, his face calm in the lantern light. "I am at peace," he answered simply, though his fingers still traced the embroidered letters of Eden's gift. Her last act of gratitude now transformed into an unintended farewell. Days stretched into weeks at the Silver Vale jail, marking time through bars of shadow across the floor. Jaden Brenner kept to simple routines, reading his Bible at dawn, helping clean the jailhouse when allowed, and carving during the long afternoon hours. His quiet dignity earned grudging respect from even the gruffest deputies. When the circuit judge's clerk offered to arrange legal counsel, Jaden merely shook his head. "The Lord knows the truth," he said softly, running calloused fingers over the small wooden cross taking shape beneath his careful knife strokes. "I'll trust his justice." The town's reaction proved less charitable. Whispers followed the sheriff's wife when she brought Jaden his daily meals. "There goes food for the fallen Amish," sneered the banker's wife from the mercantile porch. Others clucked their tongues over fence posts, embellishing tales of scandal that grew with each telling. "Heard he kept that girl locked in his root cellar," one woman insisted, though she'd never set foot near Jaden's cabin. "Probably got other victims buried out there," suggested another, earning knowing nods despite the obvious lie. Yet Jaden remained unchanged, his demeanor peaceful as he worked on his carved cross. When ugly rumors reached his ears, he would pause in his whittling and whisper a quiet prayer for those spreading them. The deputies marveled that he never complained, never grew angry. Meanwhile, in Denver, Eden McKinney tried to build a new life among the Friends, as the Quakers called themselves. Kind Sister Martha taught her letters and scripture, praising Eden's quick mind. Yet even as she learned to write her name in flowing script, guilt gnawed at her conscience like a winter wolf. Late at night, Eden would light a candle and pull out paper, trying to write the truth. Her trembling hand managed several attempts. "Dear Sheriff Lane, I must confess that Jaden Brenner is innocent. To whom it may concern, I lied about being held against my will. Honored Judge, please free Mr. Brenner as he never harmed me." But each letter ended in the wastebasket, torn to shreds as Eden wept. What if her confession brought worse trouble? What if they arrested her instead? What if admitting she'd run away led them back to her father and the dreaded marriage she'd fled? So the letters remained unwritten, while her guilt grew heavier. Each night she knelt beside her narrow bed, candle flame dancing as she prayed. In those quiet moments, she could see Jaden's calm eyes across the months and miles, the same eyes that had shown only kindness when she appeared half-frozen at his door. "Lord, protect him," she whispered nightly, though she felt unworthy to ask God's favor after her betrayal. In his cell, Jaden maintained his own ritual of prayer. The small wooden cross took shape slowly under his patient hands, each cut of the knife a meditation on forgiveness. Though he had every right to feel bitter, his heart held no anger toward Eden. He understood fear's power to twist truth, and mercy's power to heal those twists. During the day, he kept his hands busy with the cross and other small carvings the sheriff allowed him to make. At night, he observed the Sabbath with the same reverence he'd known in freedom, singing hymns softly in German while moonlight painted silver bars across the floor. Those who passed his cell often paused, moved by the gentle strength of his voice, raising songs of praise despite his circumstances. Even the sheriff's dog would lie near the cell during these evening devotions, tail thumping quietly against the wooden floor. Both Eden and Jaden believed their paths would never cross again. Yet each maintained faithful prayers for the other's well-being, their thoughts meeting unknowingly across the miles each Sabbath evening. Spring had fully arrived when Brother Timothy, a traveling Quaker elder, visited the Denver Friends meeting house. During the meal that followed worship, he mentioned his recent pass through Silver Vale. "Sad business about that Amish fellow still sitting in jail," he remarked, buttering a roll. "Seems a gentle soul, always reading his Bible or carving little wooden crosses." Eden's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Still in jail?" she whispered, face draining of color. "After all these months?" Brother Timothy nodded solemnly. "No trial date set yet. These things move slow in small towns." Eden pushed back from the table, barely mumbling an excuse before fleeing to her room. That night, she lay sleepless, Jaden's continued imprisonment burning in her mind like a brand. The thought of him sitting behind bars through winter into spring, still maintaining his dignity, still forgiving her betrayal, became unbearable. Dawn found her packing her few belongings with trembling hands. She had to go back, had to face whatever consequences came. The truth might cost her freedom, might even send her back to her father's control, but she could no longer let an innocent man suffer for her cowardice. God help me find the courage he showed, she prayed, tucking Jaden's gifted Bible into her carpetbag as the sun rose over Denver's streets. The late summer sun blazed mercilessly across the open prairie, turning the world into a shimmer of gold and dust. Eden McKinney swayed in the saddle of her borrowed mare, her cotton dress coated in the fine powder that seemed to rise from every hoofbeat. The endless rhythm of the horse's gait had worn deep into her bones after 3 days of hard riding south from Denver. Her hands, blistered from gripping the reins, trembled slightly as she caught first sight of Silver Vale's church steeple rising above the dusty horizon. The familiar view sent her heart racing, but she straightened her spine, remembering Jaden's quiet strength during those snowbound months. The town had grown since winter. New false front buildings lined the wider streets, and telegraph poles marched along the main road like wooden sentinels. As Eden guided her horse past the general store, conversations died mid-sentence. Women gathering at the water pump turned their backs. Men loitering outside the barber shop spat into the dust. "Ain't that the troublemaker girl?" someone muttered loud enough for her to hear. "The one that got that Amish fellow arrested," another voice added with obvious scorn. "Shame's finally caught up with her, I reckon," declared a third. Eden kept her eyes forward, though each barbed comment struck like a physical blow. The courthouse loomed ahead, a 2-story brick building that seemed to glare down at her with its tall windows. She dismounted stiffly, legs trembling from exhaustion and fear both. Tying her horse at the hitching post, she took a deep breath and smoothed her travel-stained skirts. The courthouse steps had never looked so steep. Each one felt like climbing a mountain as she forced herself upward, aware of hostile stares following her progress. Inside, the air hung heavy with tobacco smoke and judgment. The clerk behind the front desk gaped at her as if seeing a ghost. "I need to make a statement," Eden said, her voice smaller than she'd hoped. "About Jaden Brenner's case." The clerk's quill scratched rapidly across paper as she spoke, recording her presence and purpose. When she finished, he pointed her toward Sheriff Lane's office with a look that mingled curiosity and distaste. But the sheriff wasn't there. His deputy informed her that any new testimony would have to wait for morning court. Eden nodded, suddenly aware she had nowhere to stay. The thought of facing the town's boarding house made her knees weak. "You'll stay with me, child." The voice came from behind, firm but kind. Eden turned to find Widow Martha Wilkes standing in the doorway, her gray hair neat under a plain bonnet. The older woman's eyes held no condemnation, only understanding. "I've been expecting you," the widow continued, extending her hand. "The truth has its own time for ripening." That night, in the widow's spare room, Eden knelt beside the narrow bed. Sleep proved impossible. Her mind raced with memories of Jaden's kindness, the careful way he'd bandaged her frozen feet that first night, his patient teachings of Scripture, the gentle strength in his work-worn hands. Thoughts of him sitting in a cell through spring and summer because of her lie brought fresh waves of shame. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "help me be brave enough to make this right." Morning dawned clear and hot, the air already thick with August heat. Church bells tolled 8 o'clock as Eden walked beside Widow Martha toward the courthouse. The older woman's presence beside her felt like a shield against the townspeople's glares. The courtroom filled quickly as word spread of her return. Eden sat rigid in a back pew, hands clenched in her lap as various minor cases were heard. Finally, Sheriff Lane called out, "The matter of Territory versus Brenner." Eden's heart nearly stopped as Jaden was led in. 4 months of imprisonment had left their mark. His face was thinner, his skin pale from lack of sun. Yet he carried himself with the same quiet dignity she remembered, his beard neat despite his circumstances. She stood on shaking legs. "Your Honor, I have testimony to give." Sheriff Lane's head snapped around at her voice, genuine surprise crossing his weathered features. The judge peered down from his bench, bushy eyebrows raised. "Miss McKinney," he said slowly, "this is unexpected." Jaden's head lifted at her name. Their eyes met across the crowded room for the first time since that terrible day of his arrest. She expected to see hatred, or at least reproach, in his gaze. Instead, she found only that same gentle light that had welcomed her from the storm so many months ago. A sob caught in her throat, but she forced it down. She had come too far to falter now. The time had come to speak truth, whatever the cost. Eden stepped forward, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "Your Honor, I need to tell the whole truth of what happened this winter." The packed courtroom leaned forward, straining to hear. She described that terrible night in December. The overturned stagecoach, the blinding snow, how she'd collapsed half-frozen at Jaden's door. Her words painted vivid pictures. The warm hearth that saved her life, his quiet reading of Psalms, the careful distance he kept while offering shelter. "He never touched me," she declared, voice breaking. "Never spoke an improper word. When wolves came, he protected me with nothing but a pitchfork and his courage." Tears began streaming down her cheeks. "He taught me to read scripture, showed me what true kindness means." Gasps filled the room as she revealed her father's gambling debts, the forced betrothal she'd fled. "I was running from evil, and God led me to goodness," she said. Her shoulders shook as she continued. "When the sheriff caught me, I was scared and weak. They said if I didn't accuse Mr. Brenner, they'd send me back to that marriage." Fresh tears fell. "I lied because I was afraid, but he saved me, not sinned against me." The judge's gavel cracked against wood. "Order," he commanded as whispers rippled through the crowd. He turned his stern gaze toward Jaden. "Mr. Brenner, what do you say to this?" Jaden rose slowly, his simple black clothes hanging loose on his thinner frame. His voice, though quiet, carried clearly. "I have nothing to defend but her soul, Your Honor. The Lord sent her to my door in need. What man of faith could turn away?" The hardness in the courtroom seemed to soften, like spring ice giving way to thaw. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even some of the men who'd sneered at Jaden now looked down, shamefaced. Sheriff Lane stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, I feel bound to say, in 4 months' investigation we never found a lick of evidence against Mr. Brenner. Only rumors and suppositions." He paused. "Maybe we was too quick to judge." The judge studied both Eden and Jaden for a long moment. At last, he nodded. "Case dismissed," he declared, adding with unusual warmth, "The territory could use more men like this one." Bright noon sunlight flooded the courthouse steps as Jaden emerged. Free at last. All around, townspeople removed their hats in respect. The gesture seemed to overwhelm Eden, her legs buckled beneath her. But before she could fall, Jaden's strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her just as he had that first snowy night. Through her tears, she saw the same gentle light in his eyes that had welcomed her from the storm. And in that moment, truth and mercy met like sunshine breaking through clouds. Spring painted the Colorado highlands in tender green. At the Quaker mission near Silver Vale, Eden found her true calling, teaching orphaned children their letters. Her gentle patience, born from winter's trials, helped even the most struggling readers find confidence. Meanwhile, Jaden worked from sunrise to sunset, rebuilding his cabin. Where deep snow had once buried hope, he now planted apple saplings in neat rows. Each small tree represented faith in tomorrow, roots reaching deep into soil enriched by winter's rest. One bright Sunday afternoon, Eden walked the familiar trail to his homestead, a fresh loaf of bread warm in her basket. She found Jaden tending the young trees, his face peaceful in the dappled light. They sat together on a rough-hewn bench, sharing quiet conversation that flowed as naturally as the creek's spring thaw. A delicate apple blossom drifted down, landing in Eden's lap like a gift from above. Jaden's eyes softened as he watched her cradle it. "Spring feels like forgiveness," he whispered, his voice holding all the warmth of summer's promise. Eden nodded, joyful tears catching the sunlight. Her smile held no trace of past fears. As seasons turned, their love bloomed steady and true. By harvest time, the whole valley gathered to witness their simple wedding in the mission's courtyard. They exchanged no rings, only honest vows of faith and devotion before God and community. Now, each evening, their cabin's lamplight glows golden across the ridge, a beacon of welcome, just as it had been that first desperate night. Travelers passing through know they'll find shelter and kindness within those walls, where love was born in winter's darkest hour and flourishes in mercy's endless spring. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.